Good morning, and grace and peace to you. It's good to see you. Once again, I want to thank everyone, all the brothers, for doing the readings last week while I was able to be on vacation. Appreciate that so much, and I think it was a very good service. And it's always good to hear from each one of you why you chose your specific scripture. It just touches my heart to know that you are all into the Word and have reasons for liking certain parts of the Word of God. Thank you, Jim, for the songs. Sometimes it's difficult for the song leader to choose songs to go with the lesson, but Jim did a great job. And of course, I knew what I was going to say. You didn't know what I was going to say yet, but you can kind of tell a little bit from the title of the lesson, Living in Babylon. And so we are. Let's go to Daniel. This lesson was all prompted by our vacation last week when we Shirley and I were privileged and went with Dawn and Janet to the Sight and Sound in Lancaster to see their presentation of Daniel. If you've been there, you know what kind of a great production they put on with Bible themes. And, I'll share this with you in a little bit. But we're going to be working through Daniel. As you can see, there's a lot of scriptures there. Rick said he wanted overtime for all the scriptures he had to put up for those who are viewing out there. So maybe we ought to give Rick some overtime this week. Daniel 1 and 2. In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. The Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and he brought the vessels into the treasury of his God. Nebuchadnezzar is an interesting study, and we're not going to talk about that now, but he has a very special place, I think, in God's heart, and God used him at this point in time to teach Israel and to teach us a lot of lessons. Babel, or Babylon, had its beginnings back in Genesis chapter 10 with Nimrod, who actually built the city the first time. And then we have the story of the Tower of Babel in Genesis 11. We remember that. Babylon became a great city-state under Hammurabi. Any of you into history? All you ancient history? There we go. We got one. Yay, we got one. And he developed one of the very first codes of law, which actually was a very good code of law, a moral code that was used for a good while. And I think many law codes are kind of based on some of the things actually that he wrote as far as morality. Then that city-state declined, as often happened in the ancient days and still happens today. Nations rise and nations fall. We read about that. God causes these things to happen. But then there was Neo-Babylonia, of which Nebuchadnezzar was a part, and it flourished under him. It ruled from the Persian Gulf through the modern-day Iraq, down through Israel and all the way to Egypt. Nebuchadnezzar conquered Egypt as well. Babylon itself was a marvelous, incredible city. The walls were 40 feet thick, and it said they had chariot races on top of the walls. The Hanging Gardens were one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, with all kinds of man-made waterfalls, trees, flowers, shrubs, and everything. Just a beautiful place to go and be and chill out, I guess you would say. I'm sure the king enjoyed that. I don't know if he allowed anybody else in there or not. But then there was the Ishtar Gate leading into the city, which was a half a mile long, decorated with blue and yellow glazed tile artwork depicting animals of all types. Again, one of those things to be imposing, that if you entered Babylon, you knew you were entering a very rich and powerful city. Later, under Nebuchadnezzar II, there was a shrine to Marduk, which is reflective of the one that Nebuchadnezzar erected. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But this one was 280 feet tall. That is a monstrous shrine to a false god. In her day, Babylon was rich, powerful, and imposing, and she ruled her part of the world, and she ruled it well with an iron fist. So we saw the play at Sight and Sound, marvelously done. But there's one thing that struck both Shirley and myself when we talked about this. When they presented the majesty, the riches, the powerful of Babylon, they had a great song there. Of course, they sing a lot of songs. And the wraparound stage, huge, I don't know what, 30, 40 feet high, I don't know how high that is, depicting Babylon and singing how great Babylon is. And it just struck us. Yes, how difficult it would have been for those captives led away in chains, ripped out of their homeland, taken to Babylon, how difficult it would have been not to succumb to all that power, all that beauty, all that glory, and just to say, yes, Babylon is great, and we're going to serve you. How difficult it would have been not to give in to the pressures of Babylon. I don't think we can fathom that, but that came home to us as that was just presented there on stage. It was magnificent. It was like, wow, fantastic, this is a great place. But the whole story, as we're going to see, of Daniel, and we're going to look at very briefly, four of the stories in Daniel, which we oftentimes look at individually, go deep. We're going to just see this one main thought here in all of these narratives, consistent theme. You know, as I was thinking about that, the Lord kind of opened this up to me. Do not give in to the pressures of Babylon. Do not give in to the pressures of the world. That is the theme of all of these stories, in one way or another. Because Babylon is great, the world we live in is great. It's powerful, it's tempting, it will deceive you, it will bring pressure on you from all sides to conform. And we must not do that. Let's go to Daniel. Well, continue in Daniel 1. From the very beginning, they were under pressure. Daniel, and of course, focusing on his three friends, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael. Verse 3. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, the chief of his officials, to bring in some of the sons of Israel, including some of the royal family and of the nobles, youths in whom there was no defect, who were good-looking, showing intelligence in every branch of wisdom, endowed with understanding and discerning knowledge, and who had ability for serving in the king's court. And he ordered them, notice here what he wanted them to do, to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans. The king appointed for them a daily ration from the king's choice food and from the wine which he drank, and appointed they should be educated 3 years, at the end of which they were to enter into the king's personal service. Now among them from the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Then the commander of the officials assigned new names to them. And to Daniel he assigned the name Belteshazzar. To Hananiah, Shadrach. To Mishael, Meshach. And to Azariah, Abednego. What they wanted to do was turn these Israelites into Chaldeans. You can see it. Even down to their names. Babylonian names, eat Babylonian food, learn their language, adopt Babylonian ways, and to forget their home, and to forget they were Hebrews, and to serve the king. That's what they wanted to do. So, in order not to totally succumb, you're in the place, you do have to learn the language and so forth, but you cannot give in and just let them have their way with you. And so from the beginning, Daniel resists. And thank God he did. Daniel is a very special young man and very close to God's heart. If you read the book of Daniel, it says in one place, Daniel, you are beloved. He was very strong for the Lord, and God loved him for it. Verse 8, but Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or with the wine which he drank, so he sought permission from the commander of the officials that he might not defile himself. And there was some give and take here. I'm not going to read all this. We don't have time. Give and take here. The guy in charge says, wait a minute, if we do that and you don't look very good, I'm going to lose my head. And so Daniel says, well, we'll just do it for 10 days. We'll eat the vegetables for 10 days and not eat the king's food, and we'll see who looks better, and then we'll go from there. Well, as it turned out, after the 10 days, they looked great. They looked much better than all those who were eating at the king's table. So he allowed Daniel and the three to continue to eat their vegetables and not to eat the king's food. I'll just read that in verse 15. At the end of 10 days, their appearance seemed better, and they were fatter than all the youths who had been eating the king's choice food. The overseer continued to withhold their choice food and the wine they were to drink, and kept giving them vegetables. So Daniel gives us this great example from the outset here. Do not let them push you into their mold. Do not conform to their ways, to the ways of the world. And here's a particular point of interest for all of us to remember when we get into new places, new schools, new jobs, move to another place. When you're in a new environment, be strong in your faith from the start, from the very beginning. Do not be conformed. Don't be arrogant or condescending, but gracious yet firm in your convictions and why you are doing and believing what you do. And God will be with you. And that's what Daniel did. And of course, God was with him and with them. Let's go to chapter 2. So there was the pressure to conform. Here in chapter 2, we have the pressure to advance yourself and make yourself look good. Because that's what the world is all about. Power, looking good, doing things for yourself so that the world will like you. The world will say, you're good. We want to keep you around. This is all about Nebuchadnezzar's famous dream. He had the dream of the statue, the huge statue, the head of gold, the chest and arms of silver and so forth. We don't have time to read all that. In chapter 2, I'm going to read verse 3. He called in all the advisors, the Chaldeans, the sorcerers, the magicians. He says, I want to know what this dream means. It really bothered him. And the king said to them, I had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to understand the dream. And the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic. O king, live forever. There's what you got to say. Tell the dream to your servants, and we will declare the interpretation. Of course, I'm sure that had happened many, many times before. And we know that they just kind of speculated about what it all meant, because they didn't have any insights on dreams. The king replied to the Chaldeans, the command from me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you will be torn limb from limb, and your houses will be made a rubbish heap. So this was different. This was different this time. He was so upset about this dream and evidently thought it was so important, and in fact it was, because God had given him this dream about what was going to happen in the next days with the next kingdoms before the coming of Christ. That's why I say Nebuchadnezzar seems to have been a very chosen individual here at this point in time. Verse 12 and 13. The magicians and the sorcerers, they're arguing for time and saying, we can't do that. You have to tell us the dream. And Nebuchadnezzar says, no. If you really are a magician and a good sorcerer, you can tell me the dream. So I'm in verse 10. The Chaldeans answered the king and said, there's not a man on earth who could declare the matter for the king, inasmuch as no great king or ruler has ever asked anything like that of any magician, conjurer, or Chaldean. And because of this, the king became indignant and very furious and gave orders to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. He blew a head gasket, just like Hampton's car did here a couple of weeks ago. He said, that's it. You guys are no good. And of course, the story unravels. Daniel hears about this because Daniel and his three friends are among the magicians and sorcerers, the wise men. So they're about to lose their heads too. So Daniel hears about it. He goes to the chief of staff there, I forget his name at the moment, Arioch, and says, wait. Let's not go overboard here. We can figure this out, because he knows God is behind all of this. Let's go to verse 24. Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon, spoke to him as follows, do not destroy the wise men. Take me into the king's presence. I will declare the interpretation to the king. And Arioch goes to the king and says, wait. We got one guy here. We got a guy. I have a guy that he says he can know the dream and the interpretation. All right? So let's read 27. And Daniel answered before the king and said, as for the mystery about which the king has inquired, 26. Got to read 26. The king said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? Now this is critical and crucial to this whole story. Daniel could have well have said, sure, I can do that. But that would have been a lie. But he could have put forth himself and made himself look good. What does he say? Daniel answered before the king and said, as for the mystery about which the king has inquired, neither wise men, conjurers, magicians, nor diviners are able to declare it to the king. Can't do that. However, there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will take place in the latter days. This was your dream and the visions in your mind while on your bed. So Daniel says, not me, not any man alive, but only God. God has given you the dream, and he goes on to say only God can give the interpretation. And we see that they go, let's go down to 46. Daniel and his three companions, they pray to God about this whole thing. And God reveals the interpretation of the dream. to Daniel, and then Daniel goes in and tells the king the interpretation. We don't have time to go through all that. It's the bulk of chapter 2. But I'm in verse 46. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face and did homage to Daniel and gave orders to present to him an offering and fragrant incense. And the king answered Daniel and said, surely your God is a God of gods and a Lord of lords and a revealer of mysteries, since you have been able to reveal this mystery. And the king promoted Daniel and gave him many great gifts and made him ruler of the whole province of Babylon and chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. And then Daniel looks out for his friends there, and they get promoted as well. But the point is, Daniel did not take the credit for being able to do this. He did not try to make himself look good with the king so he could hang around and be safe and to keep his life, and the king would promote him. But he told the truth. He gave God the credit, and God took care of him. And that's what we need to do. The world is all about competition and power and being first and looking good and getting ahead. But there are a whole lot more important things than that. Faith, honesty, integrity, righteousness, serving the Lord. Trust God. He will take care of you. Daniel 3. I'm moving quickly, but I think this is important for us to see. There's pressure to worship the gods of the world. All kinds of gods out there. Atheism, naturalism, scientism, idols of all types, money, power, you name it, drugs. Pressure, pressure, pressure. This is your God. Although Nebuchadnezzar praises God at times, and you read through the book of Daniel, he does, he never seems to quite get it. Not totally. Daniel 3:1, Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, the height of which was 60 cubits, and its width 6 cubits, set up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. And the king sent word to assemble the satrap, all the big guys, okay? The rulers, governors, treasurers, to come to the dedication of this image. I'm not going to read all that. In this plain. And you can imagine why he put it in a plain, a flat area, so everyone could see that image for miles. In the plain of Dura. And he said, we're going to have a nice big band here play all kinds of instruments to praise this God. And when they do pray, you need to bow down. You need to bow down to that image. Well, you know the story. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were there. I don't know where Daniel was. But they did not bow down. And of course, the officials run to the king and say, oh, these Hebrews, they didn't bow down to your image. So Nebuchadnezzar calls them in. You know, they've got a kind of a special place already. And he says, is this true? You didn't bow down to my image? And they say, that's right. We're not going to. Let's read verse 14 in chapter 3. Nebuchadnezzar responded, said to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image I have set up? If you are ready at the moment, he gives them a second chance. If you hear the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, and bagpipe, and all kinds of music to fall down, very well. But if you do not worship, you'll be cast into that furnace. You remember the fiery furnace? And we got to read those beautiful words. They respond in 17. If it be so, our King, our God whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire. He will deliver us out of your hand, O King. But even if he does not, let it be known to you, O King, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. We're just not going to do it. We're not going to worship your gods. And we are living in our Babylon today. I've got to say that. We are not going to worship your gods. We're worshiping the true and living God and his Son, Jesus Christ. He is the King, and that's the bottom line, and that's it. He's first and only. And we can't give in. You can imagine what that would have been like on that plane where they were the only ones standing up. And God was smiling. Maybe you've been in a situation like that, similar. You're the only one standing up. You're the only one saying anything. But understand, God is smiling. Last thought, Daniel 6. You can see the recurring theme in all these stories. Do not be conformed to Babylon. You have got to follow the Lord God. There is the pressure to preserve your own life. Of course, this is the story of Daniel in the lion's den. The desire to live in this body is very strong. God has given that to us. The desire to stay alive. And I'm thankful that he has. But there again are more important things than just to live in this body. And that's another lesson we all have to learn. Daniel 6:3. A lot of envy here and jealousy. Then this Daniel began to distinguish himself among the commissioners and satraps because he possessed an extraordinary spirit, and the king planned to appoint him over the entire kingdom. At this point, we have another king from the Medes, Darius. Daniel was around a long time. He enjoyed a long life. We don't know how long, but he was around a long time. The commissioners and satraps began trying to find a ground of accusation against Daniel in regard to government affairs, and they could find no ground of accusation of evidence of corruption, inasmuch he was faithful and no negligence or corruption was to be found in him. And these men said, we will not find any ground of accusation against Daniel unless we find it against him with regard to the law of his God. So they persuaded, I'm skipping some of these scriptures, you can read them. They persuaded the king to sign this edict that said for 30 days, no one can petition anybody except you, king. Pray to any god or man except you, king. And the king, he got duped, so he signed it. So then they went, well, let's read verses 9 and 10. King Darius signed the document, that is the injunction. Now when Daniel knew that the document was signed, he entered his house. Now in his roof chamber he had windows open toward Jerusalem, and he continued kneeling on his knees 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks before his God, as he had been doing previously. Daniel says, I ain't going to listen to that. I'm going to pray to God. Even if it's just for 30 days, Daniel, can't you stop praying? No, not going to do it. That's wrong. I'm not going to cut myself off from my God. Well, of course, these jealous government guys saw him. They spied him out, went to the king. King says, is that true? Yeah, I've been praying. He said, because Darius had a place in his heart for Daniel, but he couldn't figure out how to get around it. Because he had signed the edict, and according to the laws of the Medes, you could not reject it. You could not go back on it. You could not rescind it. So it stood. So he had to throw him. This is where you know the story. He had to throw him into the den of lions. And it said Darius was up all night worrying about Daniel. Comes back in the morning and, Daniel, are you all right? He says, yeah, I'm good. My God has closed the mouth of the lions, so they did not kill me. There is that desire to keep ourselves alive, but to Daniel, there was something more important. That was serving his God and being able to pray. He says, again, kind of like the 3 that were just with the fiery furnace. If the lions kill me, the lions kill me, but I'm not going to give in to your edict not to pray to my God. Let's read verse 19. Chapter 6. The king arose at dawn at the break of day, went in haste to the lion's den. When he come near to the den, to Daniel, he cried out with a troubled voice. And the king spoke and said to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, is your God, whom you constantly serve, and able to deliver you from the lions? And Daniel spoke to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, inasmuch as I was found innocent before him. And, O king, I have committed no crime. God preserved Daniel's life because Daniel continued to serve the Lord. These days, we all need some more Daniel in us. I'm going to wrap up the last two scriptures. John 17:16. And maybe these will mean a little bit more to us after we've looked at Daniel and his three friends here living in Babylon. 16. They are not of the world, even as I am not of the world. Jesus is speaking of us, the disciples of Christ. We are not of Babylon. We are not of the world. We are of another kingdom. Remember that. And then lastly, from Romans chapter 12, Shirley's favorite chapter in all the Bible. Verse 1. Therefore I urge you, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living and holy sacrifice acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. Do not be conformed, but be transformed into the image of Christ. So when the world brings pressure on you to conform, to take all the credit, to worship its gods, to save your life at the cost of your faith, remember Daniel and the three, and understand that God is with you. God bless you.